Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and I welcome you on behalf of the members of our leadership team, which includes former Congressman Mel Levine and former LA County Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky. For me and my family, this is a very special week. It's my mother, Charlotte Kaminer's 100th birthday this week, and she has never missed one of these shows for the last 4.5 years. And we have great discussions about them, including, I know we will, about tonight's. Happy birthday, Mom, till 120. Thank you and welcome back to our very special guest tonight, former chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, and to our moderator, Warren Olney. Reminder that next week, once again, we are hosting 2 programs. On Monday of next week, we will host the amazing Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who has covered the U.S. Supreme Court for more than 3 decades, Linda Greenhouse, who will be discussing a Supreme Court on the edge. She is currently a professor at Yale Law School, and I know it'll be an amazing program. And on Wednesday, we will welcome back the former Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta, who will discuss an expert's view of our world in chaos. Both of next week's programs will be moderated by Pat Morrison. They'll be great programs and hope you'll join in. The following week, after Labor Day, we have programs on both Wednesday and Thursday. That's unusual for us. If we do 2, it's usually Monday and Wednesday, but that week it's Wednesday and Thursday. September 4th, we have Max Boot, who will be discussing from Reagan's GOP to Trump's MAGA, where are the Republicans headed? And on Thursday, we will host 2 Stanford scholars who just completed an epic report on anti-Semitism on college campuses. Larry Diamond and Jeffrey Kossoff will discuss the disturbing findings from their study and what should be done about anti-Semitism on college campuses. Reminder, all of our programs are available via podcast and YouTube after the fact and via our website. Links to all of our past programs are in every email we send. You can always find them on our website, JewsUnitedForDemocracy.org. We encourage you to send links links and forward our emails to any of your friends, especially before the November election. Super important that the public is as educated as possible about everything going on this year. Now to introduce our moderator, who will introduce Admiral Mullen and engage in dialogue about the world at war, please welcome Warren Olney, a lifelong TV and radio journalist, winner of every possible award, and a great friend to America at a crossroads. Warren?
Thank you very much, Janice, and happy birthday to Janice's mother. It is wonderful to know that you have put in all of those years, and we hope very much for many more, as Janice indicated as well. So Mike Mullen is a veteran of America at a crossroads. More importantly, he is a veteran of the U.S. Navy, having retired after 43 years as an admiral. During his time, he was chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That was during both administrations of George W. Bush and the first administration of Barack Obama. Prior to that, he was chief of naval operations. He was also leader of NATO's Joint Force Command. Since retiring, he's been involved with many corporate boards. He is still a public servant, I should say, and last year he led a delegation to Taiwan for President Biden. Admiral Mike Mullen, welcome back to America at a Crossroads. It is great to have you with us.
Thanks, Warren. And I'd also like to say happy birthday to Charlotte. That's really terrific.
Well, the title of today's program is There a Chance for Peace? We, of course, want to talk about Ukraine. We want to talk about the Middle East as well. But first, I want to talk about the chances for war. It has just been reported this week by the New York Times that President Biden, an advocate of non-proliferation and the reduction of nuclear weapons, has ordered U.S. forces to prepare for possible coordinated nuclear confrontations with Russia, China, and North Korea. Once again, that comes from the New York Times. Admiral, how much of a change in American nuclear policy is that, and do you agree that it's necessary?
It's a significant change, Warren. I read that piece as well by David Sanger, and I'm really taken back by it and the detail in it, and I'm constantly concerned with leaks that come out of the government on such sensitive material. That said, in a way, I'm not surprised. Even before Putin went into Ukraine, the Russians were saber-rattling with respect to the potential use of nuclear weapons. That's clearly a position Putin took when he went into Ukraine, and there were an awful lot of people concerned about whether he would or not. I think for the most part, that's been dissipated based on the time between when he went into Ukraine and where we are now, that we think the possibility that he would use them. And the ones that we were talking about are tactical, short-range, battlefield kinds of weapons. But to me, it's getting tougher and tougher on Putin and Russia and the Russian people, even given some success that they've had out in eastern Ukraine. So when I read this, I guess I wasn't surprised that the president actually asked that this be done. It wasn't, we just started discussions last year with China about nuclear weapons. And after a very short period of time, China called those talks off. China's arsenal is being built up dramatically. It has been in recent years, and we've had no treaties, no negotiations, no discussions with China about what they're doing. So again, I'm not surprised. I'm worried about it. I thought actually in my time, I thought we'd pretty much moved those strategic nuclear weapons off the agenda, that we wouldn't have to worry about them, and now it's coming back in the other direction.
That article in the New York Times reports on a number of things. And first of all, it says it's nuclear confrontations, coordinated nuclear confrontations, Russia, China, and North Korea as well. It talks about air flights with joint Russian and Chinese planes getting very close to Alaska, getting very close over the China Sea as well. How concerning are those things, and have they been reported before? I wasn't aware of them.
Well, I haven't seen them. They may have been reported internally, but I haven't seen the public reports of those. Those kinds of flights, though, are not uncommon historically. I mean, I can go back to the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Those were flights that the Soviets actually, particularly off Alaska, did a fair amount of. Again, it just sort of is ratcheting up. I think it's, in terms of coordination, obviously China and Russia are working more closely together. They're exercising more closely together, particularly out in the Pacific, than they have than they have ever. So I think that's all part of that. Equally concerning to me was in recent months when Putin actually engaged North Korea very, very heavily and is now aligned with them, because of the nuclear technology that Russia already has. Russia can really give technology to North Korea to accelerate their program. And that's a big worry. So all of this, from a summary standpoint, certainly says the world's getting more dangerous with the most devastating weapons man has ever created. And I'm hopeful that somehow, the leaders, Putin, Xi, Biden, and whoever the next president is, can lead us to a better place with respect to these, because of the kind of destruction that they can generate, although the trend is not going in that direction.
I don't want to stay on this too long, but one of the other things that was reported is that China, having previously limited its nuclear arsenal to roughly what the United States and Soviet Union had, or excuse me, the United States and Russia, are now apparently trying to get ahead.
Well, it'll be a while before they even get to the limits that we have constructed with the Russians, although the treaty that we've had with the Russians, which was renewed for an additional 5 years when President Biden came in, Putin has walked away from. And so, theoretically, Russia now has no limits. I think the number of deployed weapons in that treaty was 1,550 for both of us, max. And so what I'd be guessing China is doing is giving its, releasing itself to be able to go higher than that number as well. We've never been able to get China to the table to have a discussion about nuclear weapons, and I think that's really critical.
You led a delegation to Taiwan for President Biden. If China were to invade Taiwan, could the U.S. prevent it? Could it stop it?
Well, we've got great focus on this. The whole idea, I think, is to be strong, and as strong as we possibly can, to deter that, so that Xi Jinping would know that if he did that, he'd lose that fight. And I think that would prevent him. We still have the tyranny of distance there. There's been an awful lot of work to shorten that, if you will, in terms of ability to respond quickly. We've got a significant presence in that part of the world, certainly with our Navy. And the invasion piece for China, an amphibious operation, that's the most complex operation I know of. So it's certainly not a given that if China wanted to do that, they could do that. They clearly are building up their military. They're clearly focused on this. This is the worry is Xi Jinping wants to do a lot about this to essentially bring Taiwan in during his time. He's been very clear about that. So it's a really dangerous time. I consider Taiwan probably the most dangerous place on earth because it's the place that could really generate a worldwide conflict like we haven't seen since World War II. Not insignificant in that is the semiconductor world, which the center of which is in Taiwan. And there's a very strong belief that if we had war in Taiwan, that essentially that would send the world into a global depression because of the dependence that we have on the semiconductor industry that's centered there in Taiwan. So we need to do, I think leaders need to do everything we can to make sure that never happens. I guess the way I watch this is if our president and the president of China don't lead on this issue, aren't shoulder to shoulder to make sure we don't go into war, I think the likelihood of conflict just goes up over time. And Biden and Xi have met a number of times on this. I'm a little more comfortable there than I was a year ago. China's economy is in pretty bad shape, and I think Xi's got to pay attention to that. So as it seems throughout the world, enormously complex. Leaders really matter here, and we've got to get to a good place together to make sure that we never go to war over Taiwan.
How much does the relationship between China and Russia impact what's going on in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, strategically, China has clearly supported Putin. I'm not sure the president of China, Xi Jinping, knew what he signed up for when he made the pact with Putin shortly before he went into Ukraine. China has clearly supplied Russia with capability, technical capability, semiconductors. To just give you one example, as best we know, China has not provided Russia with weapons yet, and they've been warned about that from the beginning. But certainly, I think China has been supportive and not gotten in the way, not pushed Putin to end this thing as quickly as possible. Actually, as you see, even as in today's press, there was a discussion about Putin pulling up, many more conscripts, Putin going after those who have avoided their service, that kind of thing. So Putin's very, very short on people at this point. That said, I think he will continue to be able to throw young Russians into this madness to lose their lives. Russia has a history of that, and that becomes sort of their main objective. And nobody's pushing back on Putin doing that. And I think in a way, Xi Jinping is supportive of that.
What about Ukraine and its invasion into Russia, which it says it's not going to try to hold, but seems to be designed to divert Russian troops into that area of the world? How successful has that been?
Well, strategically, it's been very successful. I think it surprised everybody, including myself. I think they can only go so far into Kursk. That's not an insignificant area. I don't think Putin comes to the table until he's got something to lose, and the idea that Zelensky would be trying to create something that Putin would trade makes some sense. I don't think there's been much of a diversion of troops yet from the east over to where Kursk is, and so we'll see where that goes. I honestly don't know, but I don't expect the Ukrainians to be able to go much deeper in terms of their penetration there. But I think it was kind of a strategic shock, and it also exposed continuing poor performance on the part of the Russian military. I mean, it really has been stunning from the beginning, where they were so bad. They've collected themselves, and they're now doing what they do well, which is essentially turning places into rubble. But the troops that were up around Kursk were similarly are equally as bad as the Russians were when they went into Ukraine in the first place.
Let me just remind our listeners, and welcome to all of you. You do get a chance to ask questions, and I'll get to them hopefully in 10 or 15 minutes. But you can just go to the Q&A function, the chat function, and I see some people have already done that, and please don't hesitate to do it. Admiral, back to you. Should the U.S. allow Ukraine to use American weapons on Russian soil?
Yeah, I'm more and more inclined to say yes in that regard. I think part of the reason we're here, and I think the Biden administration, certainly from putting NATO together, putting the support together, keeping it together, fighting for that, that has just been terrific. And it's gotten Putin exactly what he didn't want, which is a very comprehensive NATO wall, if you will, to include adding Finland and Sweden to the mix, which I didn't think would ever happen. At the same time, I think there's probably been too much what I'll call just-in-time weapons, if you will. And I think from that standpoint, that we need to, as best we can, give them as much as we can, as fast as we can. We need to be mindful of what Zelensky could do with those weapons. And I know that there's very clear guidance on what they can and can't do, but I'd like to see them extend. I'd like to see put more and more of Russia, in a really difficult position.
Back to the question that is the title of this program: is there a chance for peace? It sounds like you have to be pretty speculative at this point to answer that question.
Yeah, if you were gonna ask me at the beginning of the program, yes or no, I'd say not much chance right now. That's what I see. I mean, I think, and I would assume we'll talk a little bit about the Middle East as well. It's just when you have all three places like this, and obviously we're not at war about Taiwan or with China, and I hope that never happens. Yeah. It's as dangerous as I've ever seen it, and uncertain about where it goes, and it's not going in the right direction.
So what about the Middle East then? We have there a situation where the war is going on in Gaza. Israel's main foe is Iran, but a peace treaty or a ceasefire in Gaza seems to be crucial to any kind of change there. What do you see?
Well, first of all, with both in Ukraine and in Gaza, I mean, and this is just part of what I went through when I was serving. These wars don't last a short period of time. So I'm not optimistic about any near-term solution in Gaza, nor am I optimistic about a near-term solution in Ukraine. For whatever reason, they just don't stop quickly. And so that's part of it. Secondly, it's just an unbelievably complex, difficult war. Particularly when you have, I mean, what I don't see and discussed enough actually in the media is the instability and uncertainty that was created by Hamas on Israeli security, which had been sound for decades, literally since the late 40s, and seemingly more and more secure. And all of a sudden that went away. And I think it's going to be decades before the Israeli people feel the kind of security that they think they need in that part of the world. And that will require, I think, a very, very strong support on the part of the United States and others, but particularly the United States, for decades as well. So that's one piece, is getting them back to a level of real security, because they are unbelievably unnerved. I fully expected the Israelis to go after Hamas literally when I heard about the attack, and to capture or kill as many Hamas leaders as they possibly can. I did not expect to see the human devastation associated with what we see on a daily basis, seemingly, on Gaza and the Palestinians in particular. I don't think Hamas cares a hoot about the Palestinians. And quite frankly, my own experience historically has been the Arabs haven't cared much about the Palestinians, unless it became a political liability for them, which it is now becoming. In a conversation I had with someone recently, I think the core of all this, actually, Warren, is Iran. And my own view is we need to be more active, forceful, strong, go on offense, if you will, much more so with Iran. We've been dealing with Iran through multiple administrations for 45 years, and look where we are. I don't want to see us do it for another 45 years. And I actually believe that it was the Saudi-Israeli close proximity to a deal that was causal to Hamas basically attacking Israel. And I think we're a long way from that right now, but I mean, that still needs to be the end goal. And when I say go on offense with respect to Iran, I don't mean, I'm not looking for a military fight per se, but I think Iran's pretty vulnerable right now. Their leader is in his late 80s. The IRGC leadership is repositioning to figure out where they need to be as you know, when the new leader comes in, whoever that's going to be. So they're vulnerable. I think we need to push on them in every sector, diplomatic, on the world stage, economically, and if necessary, militarily. I've never really feared the Iranian military. They are, though, masters of the proxy universe. That's how they execute their strategy. And I think that's where we have to try to get them to pull their proxies back so that we can figure out how to support stabilization in the Middle East.
Let me ask you about Israel itself. The magnitude of the killing, which you mentioned earlier, which seems out of proportion to what happened on October 7th to a lot of people, and the reports of brutality have apparently divided Israel in a very significant way. How much more difficult does that make it for Israel to work its way toward some kind of peace, if in fact that's what it wants and needs?
Hugely difficult to do that based on what's happened. I mean, back to it's going to be generations before the stability there and security is, I think, comfortable enough for the Israeli people. My learnings in the terrorist world, if you will, have been the more you kill, the more you make. So Israel has made enemies of generations of Palestinians that will be around for the next 50, 60, 70 years. And I think is going to have to deal with that. I recently read where the desire for or the support of a two-state system on the part of the Israelis and the Palestinians is almost at an all-time low. So I don't see that immediately around the corner, though I still think in the end that's the best outcome. I just think it's a long way away. And then the politics in Israel have just made this unbelievably difficult, and Netanyahu in particular. And I'm not one normally to try to push our political leadership to do something about their politics, because we try to stay out of that. But I'm also mindful that Netanyahu's come here twice in recent years and been right in the middle of our politics, whether he intends to be or not, or says he's not. He is, and he's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing. And I think pushing on him, because I think he will extend this war as long as he can. He's facing a reckoning after October 7th, and I think it'll see him out of the office, and then there is the legal issues that he continues to face. I'm not convinced that he's doing everything he can to bring the hostages back. I wasn't surprised, sad as it was, tragic as it was, to see the 6 hostages that were found yesterday or 2 days ago that were dead. I expect that, sadly, I expect that in the future. In a way, Netanyahu's almost, in my view, and I know some of the families feel this way, has written off the hostages. So I don't expect him to make a deal. I'm not surprised that Hamas rejected this. I think that rejected this latest initiative. I think they'll extend it until well into the future. So and the other thing that I learned in the Middle East, particularly with factions that hated each other at a level I didn't really understand hate, oftentimes they hardly think they're human beings. So when you kill them, it doesn't make any impact on them. And I worry there's too much of that kind of thought on both sides of this fight.
Dennis Ross, obviously a noted authority on this subject, was on this program on Monday night, and he said he thinks that there will be a change of regime in Israel within the next year. I think I'm quoting him correctly in saying that, or paraphrasing him correctly. I certainly apologize if I'm not, but I believe I am. How much of a difference do you think that might make?
Well, obviously it depends on how strong the next regime is or how far right it is. I think if it's just a repeat of those who are on the right wing that are running the country, I'm not sure there'll be much change at all. I would hoped that there would be a change to move the politics back towards the center. And Netanyahu's certainly taken it, I think, to support his own survival, far to the right, much further to the right than when I met with him, when I knew him back in the Bush and the Obama administrations. It's a matter of his survival. And Dennis is smarter on this than I am. That said, I think 1 year is pretty optimistic at this point, and I would not expect whatever that timeline is. I would expect Netanyahu to try to run this war out to support that. And I actually spoke with a friend the other day who said that Netanyahu's numbers are actually getting better recently because of the positions that he's taken. So it's, again, like so many of these things, unbelievably complex and challenging for any administration to figure out what we should do. I think we need to continue supporting Israel, continue sending them the weapons to fight. I've got a lot of faith in the IDF, always have, and I think they typically are much more balanced, have a much more balanced view and they're ready. I think I've read they're ready to start a ceasefire right now. Obviously, Netanyahu is not.
Does Netanyahu, do you think, have to exercise some sort of, I guess, punishment would be the right term, for the kinds of brutality that have been reported, if they turn out to be true? And will that make a difference, do you think, to the way that the United States views the situation?
Punishment of
troops who have been accused of brutally attacking prisoners in ways I don't want to describe.
Yeah, absolutely, he needs to do that. I mean, that's part of who we are as a democracy, and in the world, including in Israel, where the civilians control the military. I think it's vital for the future, because this will be remembered in totality. And if you don't do something about that, it will continue as well. So now, whether he will or not is another question, but I think he absolutely needs to do that. And I mean, to me, he's getting into a position where he's going to destabilize Israel's future for decades based on a strategy to kill as many and eliminate Hamas as much as possible. And he knows this. You're making as many enemies as you're killing, even though I think the leadership of Hamas is certainly a valid target to eliminate them as quickly as possible.
The American posture toward this whole situation and toward Israel and toward the war in Gaza is certainly a lively topic at the Democratic Convention this week.
Yeah.
What do you see as the differences between Trump and I guess Biden / Kamala Harris when we find out what her position really is?
Well, I spoke to somebody in Israel 2 or 3 weeks ago, a good friend of mine, and said, basically he said, he's one of my counterparts from, a long time ago. He said, there's no more popular leader, in the world right now in Israel than Biden, because he's been such a strong supporter. And Netanyahu knows this, and, Netanyahu comes here to make it more difficult on Biden. And in a way, I think takes advantage of what Biden has done in terms of extending support to Israel. And I think that's going to continue under great criticism, as you know, or we all know, here in the United States for supporting, for sending as many weapons as he has. And he has to, and I think he has to continue to do that. That said, I will put a caveat here. I've never understood how anybody could think a 2,000-pound bomb could work, precisely, in a place like Gaza. That said, there's an awful lot of weapon support that we need to continue to give them. It's been very difficult politically because obviously of the human devastation on the Palestinian side, the women, the children, just the catastrophic and tragic deaths associated with that. And I think Biden's trying to hit somewhere in the middle. I mean, basically trying to hit to be able to do both, and certainly sent that message to Netanyahu, who oftentimes is just ignoring what Biden's saying. It's just and whoever comes in is going to pick up the baton with basically the same challenge. And I'm not sure. I mean, Trump says he's a stronger supporter of Israel. I don't believe that in terms of what he's what he has done or what he will do per se. And I would expect Harris to obviously continue this. She's learned a lot. The challenge for her is, I think, is going to be, and she seems to be a little more vocal about the Palestinian cause, if you will, and the protests that are associated with that. So I just think it's going to be real. It's going to be, part of the full bus when you take over as president. There's a lot going on there, and that's part of the responsibility once you become commander in chief.
We learned last night that there are some uncommitted delegates to the Democratic Convention, and presumably that's because of Palestine and the concern about the Palestinians. The enormous demonstrations comparable to what happened in 1968 haven't materialized, certainly as yet. There's still some days to go. But how important do you think that is? And would it be much more difficult for Vice President Harris to take a stand if, in fact, there were divisions within the party that would be illustrated that way?
Well, it may be more difficult, but that's what the president gets paid to do. And should she get in there, she's going to have to do that. And I think there's a reality. And I watched this with President Obama because I was there when he came in.
Yeah.
And he and I had this discussion. He said, "I caught the bus. What's on it?" And I said, "The bus is loaded, and it's still loaded." So, and you're going to have to make whoever it is, and if it's Vice President Harris that comes in, she's going to have to make hard decisions quickly with respect to this issue. And I think she's going to have a hard time walking away from Israel. And I'm very supportive of not walking away from Israel. It's just the totality of what's involved right now in terms of that is really, really challenging. Again, these things go on a long time. I don't think it's going to be resolved by the 20th of January next year.
I have talked to you many times on this program, and I've stayed away from any kind of political questions because I don't think you're comfortable answering them, but I just can't help but ask, what did you think about Obama's speech last night at the convention?
Well, actually, I honestly, Warren, I didn't watch it.
Okay.
I turned.
Good way to answer.
Because I knew you were going to ask me that question. No, I actually turned. I actually watched the roll call, which I thought was, really pretty exciting and fun to watch.
It was fun.
I didn't see the speeches, but I did see some of the clips on Obama, and I think he was properly so accurate when he said his wasn't the best speech because he succeeded. He followed his wife, and I thought his line with respect to that about I'm the only one stupid enough to do that was a pretty good line. But he clearly, part of Obama is he can really fire you up. He can really get going. And from what I could see, and that was his job too last night. From what I could see with the clips last night, that's what he did.
Well, let me go to the audience. I think this is a subject that is certainly going to intrigue our people, and I'm going to go earlier than I normally do. David Goldberg has had something on the chat since 5:05 p.m. And here it is. If Trump wins election in November, is it reasonable and appropriate during the lame duck period before the inauguration to ask the heads of all the military divisions to publicly reaffirm their oaths of office to defend the U.S. Constitution and not to obey criminal orders?
I think that it would be appalling to do that. The assumption, quite frankly, is that they may not do it. And actually, that's what we do for a living. And what we do, and we've done it, one administration to another, is with a brand new president, we throw the switch. And it's not about who the president is, it's about following lawful orders specifically. So that kind of reaffirmation would offend me no end.
We have seen some retired military officers who have gotten on the Trump bandwagon, as it were. A lot of the people who are high up in the military at the moment. I take it you're suggesting that there aren't a lot of people like that currently in service.
Well, you never know. Some people can surprise you. I mean, part of what happens to us, and I had this throughout my career, is we don't talk about politics on active duty. We don't really know where individuals lay politically. And it's clearly after the fact, and I've pushed back against this for years, where we've had at both Democratic and Republican conventions retired admirals and generals speak, and I've been appalled by that. I was actually asked to speak at this convention, and I said, not a chance. For that reason, because it further politicizes the military. Even though we're civilians at that point, we have every right. I don't push against that. But it's as if, quite frankly, we end up hurting the organizations that we dearly loved our whole professional life. So I hope that doesn't happen in this convention, and I hope it doesn't happen publicly. I don't mind people, retired flags, briefing or explaining what issues are to candidates on either side privately to make them smarter and their team smarter about what's going on. But I think the public endorsement, it just pulls us further and further into politics. And there's, at least in my lifetime, there's never been a more difficult, divisive political environment, and you just can't win with that.
It's been a long time since Curtis LeMay, the Air Force general, ran for vice president with George Wallace. I took it you didn't approve of that.
I wasn't a big, but it was instinct. I was a junior officer with LeMay. I wasn't a big fan, just based on sort of this huge boasting voice that he kind of threw out there. But if someone goes to do that, if a former military officer or a veteran gets into politics, that's different. I'm okay with that. And we have a lot of Iraq and Afghanistan vets now in Congress and others running, and we need more and more with that experience. I'm fine with that. But for those of us that aren't in politics, and then commenting on that and all the policies that are associated with that, I think that hurts us.
How do you draw the line between officers who should run and officers who should not?
Well, I think they get to choose, quite frankly, and the American people get to pick. That's where I draw it, and clearly I'm okay with that. I support an organization called With Honor that has been basically supporting particularly Iraq and Afghanistan vets who are running for Congress, and particularly the first time. And I think that's really important on both sides of the aisle for the long term. And a bunch of them have won, and a bunch of them have not. But the commitment of With Honor is that they are bipartisan, that they will sponsor a piece of bipartisan legislation every year, et cetera. And part of that is just because of our background in the military. We meet individuals, we have battle buddies that we fought with who are from vastly different backgrounds than each of us. And I think the strength of that and understanding each other is a lot of what's missing right now in the country about understanding other people.
Okay, couple more questions from the chat session. Robert Olish wants to know what should be done with Iran's nuclear program?
Well, I've feared Iran's nuclear program for years, and they are now, I think I've read recently, within a number of 2 or 3 weeks of being able to produce weapons-grade uranium, because they've enriched to a fairly high level. I think it's 60% or 70%, something like that. And the time to get from 70% to 90%, which is what you need, is very quick. So they're very close to a breakout, which is where we were when the Obama administration made the deal back in 2015, I think it was. And in that regard, it's very dangerous. I worry about the proliferation. If Iran gets nuclear weapons, I worry about Saudi, Egypt, Turkey, and others. And more countries with those just makes the world a whole lot more dangerous, much less the Middle East, which is a dangerous place every single day. And it gets back to where we started, the conversation about nuclear weapons. They're the most devastating, dangerous weapons in the world. We don't need more of them. We need less of them. I personally would like to see them all go away. That's an unrealistic achievement in the near term, but eventually the world would be a better place with none of them. So anything that we can do to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, developing a nuclear weapon, I think we need to do it.
Did Ronald Reagan do more than other presidents have to limit nuclear weapons worldwide?
it's, it's hard. I guess I'd almost go back to the SALT Treaty, the 72 treaty that we had, it's sort of, that was a time when we started to put limits. So this is a treaty we had with the Soviets.
Yeah.
And we really started to put constraints, verification, inspections, develop some level of trust. This was Reagan's trust but verify kind of thing. But even before him, and then I think everybody since that time has continued to try to squeeze it, particularly since the wall came down. And we've reduced dramatically the number of strategic nuclear weapons that we have, as have the Russians, as a result of those treaties. There's been other proliferations. I think I may have this wrong. I think there are 9 countries right now that have nuclear weapons, and that's 9 too many from my perspective. But it hasn't, it hasn't exploded as it potentially could in other countries in the world. And we need to do everything we can to make sure it doesn't.
Necessarily, we bounce around with the questions, so we go from subject to subject. Jim wants to know, do you think that Ukraine might have been better served by taking back Crimea instead of invading Russia?
I've just never thought it was a very realistic objective that they're going to get Crimea back. I thought from the beginning that Zelensky pushing, one, first of all, saving Kyiv, and two, pushing as far east as possible. All these wars end in some kind of a negotiation at the table. My own view is at some point there's going to be a chunk of eastern Ukraine that possibly is going to have to go to Russia, et cetera, to end this thing. But ending it, that doesn't mean just give Russia what they want, because I think Ukraine gets a lot out of that as well, or there's not a negotiation to include, I think we need to bring Ukraine into the EU, easy for me to say, I'm sitting in America, as quickly as possible, and then create a path for them to get into NATO down the road as well, and then support them in that regard. I don't think the other thing, and this was, I had a relationship with Kissinger, and before Kissinger died, and we were talking about Ukraine, and as only Kissinger could say, he said, Mike, listen, when the French, and the Germans are trying to get to Moscow, it was 1,000 miles. With Ukraine, it's 300. So the threat, from the Russian perspective, whether you believe Putin or not, physically, it's much closer than it was, before Ukraine. I don't think it's realistic to get Crimea back. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I'd certainly like to see that, but I just don't think it's very realistic.
Philip asked this: Ukraine is finally starting to receive F-16 fighter jets. Do you think that this will make a significant difference in terms of defending against Russia's air-launched weapons? And I would ask further that, as I understand it, not all the Ukrainian pilots are trained to fly F-16s, and there is some movement to allow retired American pilots to go to Ukraine and fly them if they want to. I would just add that onto Philip's question.
I think that they will make that the F-16s, which they're now crewing up now, they're now training as we speak, and I'll give Denmark a shout out, because Denmark has been very supportive of this training, not just conceptually but financially, and with some of their F-16s, and I think they will make a significant difference. I've not heard of U.S. pilots going to fly for, or former F-16 pilots going to fly for the Ukrainians. I know, the F-16 is proliferated around the world. There will be a lot of former pilots that have that capability. Whether they want to go do that, obviously that's up to them. I don't know. I'm honestly not sure what kind of position the U.S. would take with respect to that. At this point in time, I would think we'd probably resist that.
Roger Schwartz wants to know, should Israel go to the jugular by attacking Iran rather than its proxies?
It depends on what you mean by attack. I think if they're going to start an all-out war with Iran, that's going to be a huge challenge for them. That they could do something precise, that they could start to limit some capability, although the targets for Iran's nuclear program, which has been the strategic threat for Israel for some time, are very difficult targets for Israel. So I mean, since October 7th, I mean, long before that, but specifically since October 7th, my worry is that this will continue to expand and the Middle East will get out of control. And if Israel did that, I think it would be out of control. And then if they did that, it's hard for, as strong as we support Israel, we would be in an extraordinarily difficult position to decide whether we would go in with them or not.
Neil Maslin wants to know, what are the consequences of Americans' overwhelming naval presence and the demonstration of support for Israel in the Mideast? How deeply does that risk drawing us into a war with Iran?
Well, I think this is the second time since October 7th where we've pulsed some of our naval assets, carriers in particular, well, other ships, missile shooters, and it's had a deterrent effect. I honestly, I don't worry. My sense is I don't think Iran wants to get into a war with the U.S. And so I don't think that risk with these forces is that significant. I'm hopeful that it will have a deterrent effect on Iran, particularly as they're sitting back, at least temporarily sitting back with their response because of these recent assassinations. I think the fact that they're sitting back is an indicator that they really don't want to go to war, that they want to be careful with their response, as they have been in other cases. Although the 300 plus drones and missiles was that was a big change because they actually went after Israel proper. That was the first time they went after Israel, the country. And in the tit for tat that went on after that, they were pretty selective and precise about what they did, seemingly not wanting to let it get out of control.
We don't know that the assassination that occurred in Iran itself of a important Hamas official
Right.
was in fact done by Israel. Israel hasn't admitted to it, as they have, or boasted about it, whatever it would be, as they have to the one in Lebanon. Was that a bad idea? Whoever did it?
My own view is that again, and I don't know who did it. I certainly, if someone told me Israel did it, I wouldn't be surprised.
Mm.
And they have a pretty significant track record for this. So in the end, I'm not even sure Hamas or the Iranians were surprised. Obviously devastated that it would happen in Tehran, in some kind of a residence that they thought obviously was secure. I think the leadership of Hamas, and I'm sure they are, but I think the leadership of Hamas, needs to fear every single day that it could be their last day. And so from that standpoint, I think and I do believe you impact Hamas by taking out their leader. So in that regard, I thought it was a good idea. I think it was a good idea.
Phil wants to know if you have been critical or are critical of the Biden administration's aid process when it comes to Ukraine. Do you think the war would be going differently if the U.S. would have been quicker with that aid? Do you think if Harris wins, she'll be looser and faster on delivering Ukraine weapons? Excuse me for fumbling that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, quite frankly, at the beginning of Ukraine, particularly when there was so much discussion about nuclear weapons, I think the deliberate, careful measurement of giving aid and support until we had sorted that out, and I don't have the intelligence, but until we'd sorted that out, that made a lot of sense to me. I think once we were beyond that, we probably could have been quicker. And I think figuring out, my sense is that Vice President Harris, having been there obviously for the whole thing with President Biden, would probably continue along those lines, meaning support. I would hope that it would be a little more significant and a little quicker. And she's going to be up against any president. I think I mean, if it's Trump, he's been pretty clear, seemingly to me, he's coming out. He's not going to support. And I think that starts to get at a really huge issue for the United States, which is what do we want to be in this century? And do we want to make a difference, or do we want to come home? Historically, isolation has not served us well, whether it was 1917, 1941, 2000, 2001. So I think the outcomes of isolation can be very, very dangerous. At the same time, I worry that we are not escalating in some areas fast enough to really make the difference that we could on the part of the Biden administration.
Former President Trump often says that if he could just talk to these leaders, everything would be okay because they respect him more than they do other Americans. Are you persuaded that he is, in fact, an isolationist and that he would follow those kinds of policies?
Well, I mean, to me, he's been very clear about coming home, and I'm not completely persuaded he's an isolationist. No, but he's certainly closer from my standpoint than the engagement piece that, I support. That I mean, I grew up under that. We've had 80 years of, relative peace, certainly no global wars per se. And I think that, to me, that's my learning, and that's the path I'd like to stay on.
Alan Crockett wants to know, what do you think the United States should do about settler violence in the West Bank?
That again, that gets into their politics. I think the Israeli people have to come to grips with that politically in their own country, and elect a leadership that they're comfortable with to resolve that issue. I mean, it's becoming, obviously, just if you look at a map, it's becoming more and more impossible to the Israeli settlements have just continued to expand further and further into the West Bank in particular. But I really do believe that's up to the Israeli people and their elected government.
Roger Baskin says he has a great question. I'll leave it up to others to make that decision. But what military strategy could Israel have adopted which would have resulted in less Palestinian death and destruction?
I think the military strategy, different from the political strategy, I think the military strategy to be much more deliberate, much more precise, and taking more time, which is a real challenge because everybody's in a hurry, particularly Netanyahu, would have been a much better strategy and long-term have a long-term impact on Hamas rather than sort of the massive destruction which has occurred.
E.A. Smith, who comes from Santa Paula, California, says, given the previous interference of enemy states in our presidential elections, what measures has the U.S. government taken to prevent such actions from occurring in the present time?
Well, my own experience is, it's a great question. My own experience is that we're a learning organization. Obviously, we went through some really bad disinformation and penetration, in our last two elections. Not as bad in 2020 as it was in 2016. And so we're very much on guard for that. Although I was struck the other day with, Iran coming in on the Trump campaign, and I guess not surprised. We certainly should expect it. We need to I think, publicize it as rapidly as possible, and do all we can to make sure that it doesn't have any kind of significant impact on our own elections. But I have every expectation that it will continue along the lines of what we're starting to see. And there's an awful lot of people doing everything they can to make sure that it doesn't have any impact, Americans, that it doesn't have any impact on our elections.
Bob Silberg says, if you favor continuing to send all the weapons that Israel wants, I'm not sure we're doing that, but he says we are, and you think Netanyahu wants to extend the war as long as he can, how do you think the U.S. can pressure Israel to pursue a ceasefire and ultimately peace?
I think, and I tried to address this, Italy, I think earlier, I think we need to make it as difficult as possible on Netanyahu politically in his own country. He has chosen to make it as difficult as he could on our leading politicians when he has come here twice, certainly against the wishes of the sitting presidents. And I think we can certainly look in that direction to make it as hard as we possibly can. In the end, he's going to stay there as long as the Israeli people allow him to stay there, and it's going to be their decision.
I'm getting the information that a lot of people have asked, pardon me, the following questions. Pardon me. What were Israel's choices in response to October 7th, which would have caused fewer civilian deaths? You've addressed that to some extent, but
Right.
she goes on and says, given that Hamas has threatened to repeat those actions, what have been, in your opinion, a proper response to Hamas? I think you've repeated yourself, or you've answered that before, but perhaps you can elaborate on it a bit.
I guess the only thing I'd say is it would be much more deliberate, precise, with much greater, not none, because war just doesn't allow this, not no collateral damage, but with a whole lot less than that. That would take more time. And the strategic objective of wiping out Hamas, I think, is a worthy objective. And I think Israel's going to pursue that and do everything they can to possibly do that.
Ruth wants to know, do you think at some point there will be another nuclear weapons deal with Iran?
I don't think so. That's me. I just don't think so. I think, and if you're sitting where Iran is, you just ask the question, I make a deal and then it gets pulled out from under me. Why would I deal with you again? So I just don't think so. And then particularly with what Iran is now doing in terms of the Middle East and its instability, I think we just need to bring total pressure on them to get them to basically believe that what they're doing in terms of the kinds of things with their proxies is not serving them very well, and that they would back away.
Robert wants to know, how concerned are you about Hezbollah opening a second front in the northern part of Israel?
Extremely concerned. I worry a great deal about Israel being able to handle both Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon. A two-front war would be hugely challenging for them. So, and for whatever reason, and so far it's also, and it may be Iran, but Nasrallah, who's a leader of Hezbollah, has shown some restraint, certainly has indicated he doesn't want to get into an all-out war at this point. But I still consider that as a possibility.
All the way back to the first part of the question, first part of the program, Leanne and Lisa want to know, how much of a threat is North Korea? Their solid fuel rockets can supposedly be fired with only minutes for the U.S. to respond. Isn't that a huge problem?
Yeah, it is a huge problem, and it will continue to grow. And as I indicated, I think early in the program, now that Kim Jong-un is another one of Putin's best friends, I worry about the high-end technology that Russia already has, because they've been a nuclear weapons power for a long time, transferring that to North Korea so that they can become much more dangerous than they are right now.
The theme of this program, or the question asked at the outset of the question, was, is there a chance for peace? As you know, at the end of the program, and we have arrived at the end of the program, we always want to give you an opportunity, if you can, to be optimistic in any way that it's possible to be. So we have about a minute and a half left. So fill that time, if you will, with an answer, a response to that request on our part.
Well, I guess what I would say right now, what seemingly is going on here in the U.S., that I'm more optimistic than I was certainly a month ago, was the state of the Democratic Party, and to the degree less, it's not just the state of the Democratic Party, but that the elections, back to what I would consider to be a close call. I thought as much of a patriot as Biden has been his whole life, certainly that debate was just seemingly devastating, and now seemingly being in a position to make it a horse race, I'm much more optimistic about that. I think whoever becomes president needs to focus on unifying this country. I mean, we are as divided, certainly politically, as I've ever seen. And yet I think the vast majority of Americans would relish a leader that would bring the country together, and do so in a way where we can take advantage of who we are, the people, the resources, our democracy, what we've done for 250 plus or almost 250 years, to really lead the world in ways that we are capable of and have in many ways for the last 80 years. So I'm more hopeful, certainly, than where I was a month ago with respect to this election in terms of it being a horse race. And I think that's really important for the country.
Admiral Mike Mullen continuing an extraordinary career as a public servant. This really is a public service to be on this program and others like it. Thank you so very, very much. It's my privilege to talk to you always, and look forward to do it again.
Thanks, Warren. It's great to be with you.
Okay, that's the end of our program for today. Next week, it's Linda Greenhouse with Pat Morrison talking about the U.S. Supreme Court on the edge. After that, Leon Panetta with Pat Morrison, an experts group of a world in chaos. Thanks, everybody, for being with us. Have a good night.